Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us, and welcome to Firing Range, a podcast to talk about Destiny 2, Sandbox, all that jazz. I don't have my usual script in front of me, but it doesn't matter because we have a special guest tonight, looking suave, growing out the mustache there. He's looking good. My man, Merc from Bungie, is here again. Really surprised that this podcast came together the way that it did so quickly. Merc, we really appreciate you taking time to talk shop with us tonight. Thanks for being available, buddy.
Yeah, of course. I'm always happy to come on the show. Feels like coming back home. And I know we've done a lot of weapons related stuff recently. So like I'm also happy to answer questions and talk through decisions and do all that stuff.
Hail to the yeah. I will give the people listening at home a little bit of a heads up. As always, I know there are always a ton of questions we want to ask of employees at Bungie. Always fun to peek behind the curtain. It's exciting and there's a lot of information to be shared. And I know that sometimes there are a lot of burning questions that the community at large always wants to have. We will always want unlimited knowledge. But Merc is a member of a specific team, at Bungie. He can't speak to everything. He can only speak to the things that he can speak on. So if we're coming in hot with questions, Merc, remove skill-based matchmaking. Talk about that for a while, why don't you? He can't, is the point that I'm trying to make. Something I always need to mention when we have Bungie folks who are cool enough to, agree to be on the show. So Merc, again, thank you for being here. And extra special treat, Drew's here. What's up, Drew?
The band's back together.
Yeah, he's rolling his eyes. Don't you roll your eyes at me,
the Beatles reunion tour.
all kidding aside, it's always great to see Drew. Good to have you here, buddy. Hope things are going well. And thanks
to be here.
Thanks to everybody for making the time. Do we all have the outline open?
Yes.
Great. Yep. Does anyone want to dive in? I've been doing a lot of talking. We have some pre-prepared questions for Merc, starting off with the news that was announced today. We are recording February 1st, and Bungie put out an update on their website about changes coming to weapons, mainly on the PvE front in Season 20. How long are we allowed to ask you how long those changes have kind of been in the fire, Merc? Give or take, ballpark.
Trying to think, what are we working on right now? We'll be on Season 21 weapons balance changes. So these have probably been in for a season to a half a season. And then usually we play test them. Like the bigger changes or like the more likelihood that it changes to be like meta defining or something, the more we play test it. Okay. But then usually what happens is we have the changes done and we find like a release vehicle for the changes, right? So we either try to pull them into a mid-season balance pass like we did with the changes from a couple weeks ago, or if they're like really, really like bone-breaking changes or they deal with stuff behind the scenes, it's like a little bit more complicated. Then we'll leave those in like one of our actual like full releases, right?
Sure.
So these have probably been, done for maybe half a season at the least, maybe a full season at the most.
Okay, fair enough. Before we get into the follow-up questions that mainly we kind of pulled from people on Twitter, thank you, people from Twitter. Cammy, Cool Guy, or Drew, do we have any initial thoughts on the changes or previews that Bungie kind of previewed on their website today? Any overall thoughts, 30,000-foot view type deal?
In general, if it's mostly PvE stuff, I'll just use whatever has the highest damage number and move on with my day.
I'm usually in the same boat, and that's fine. Cool Guy or Drew?
No.
I felt a lot of it was like PvE related, and to be honest, I just don't think that I have as much capacity to comment on that as maybe some other folks in the community that are more involved. And for me, it's like it's hard to be critical. A lot of the time, I'm just like, okay, I guess that sounds good to me. And yeah.
I think it's important to know kind of your strengths and weaknesses maybe in the community at large. Maybe I think the majority of us here can probably speak to PvP, but
I think most of the stuff we'll talk about today from like these changes will be like answering yes or no questions.
Sort of,
people had questions about what they read in the update, and it will just be like, yep, it does do that, or like, no, it doesn't do that. Yeah, and then the meat and potatoes will probably be the mid-season pass, just because that has so much PvP effect.
That's fair enough. With that in mind, why don't we just dive right in? People on Twitter wanted to know, Merc, does the grenade launcher buff mentioned on the update on the website today affect Anarchy?
It does indeed affect Anarchy.
Son of a bitch.
That's increased damage versus champions, mini bosses, bosses, and vehicles by 20%, and miners 40%.
20%. What was the initial, when Anarchy got hit way back when? I'm trying to remember how long ago it was. What did it get taken down by? Did anyone remember that number? It's a really specific question. If you can't remember, it's totally fine. I'm just trying to think of what it used to be at. In relation,
I think if it's not back to where it used to be, it's probably pretty close. But like the PvE DPS meta has power crept like moderately substantially between linear fusion rifles, like new sub families, and also between new perks, right? Like the Viced Origin perk was pretty strong. We slotted 4th times the charm and triple tap on more stuff. And so like the DPS meta is like pretty high up there compared to I think where it was after we nerfed Anarchy the first time. So
got it. We're getting in the live Twitch chat. People seem to say that it was a 30% change. So we're actually pretty close to where it used to be. Not exactly right there on the doorstep. Like, you know, not too far off. By the way, I know we're not there yet, but was it kind of a hard decision with the to change the Viced Stinger origin trait, or was it kind of pretty unanimous that it was really good in PvE?
I mean, I wasn't the one specifically who made that change, but as a team, I think we looked at it and it was like, this is really strong for an origin perk. Like compared to what a lot of the other origin perks do, especially in well, not even just in DPS, but just in general, like it's really strong for an origin perk. So I think as a whole, we looked at it and we're like, maybe we can bump this down just a sketch.
Fair enough. Do the machine gun buffs listed on the website today affect Grand Overture or Xenophage in terms of damage or inventory?
So Grand Overture and Xenophage are actually like set up slightly differently behind the scenes than normal machine guns are. So if it, you know, shares a profile with a high impact, a rapid fire and adaptive, like Thunderlord does, then it gets the buff to damage. So Grand Overture actually does get the damage buff. Xenophage does not get either the damage or the inventory buffs, and Grand Overture does not get the inventory buffs either. So out of those 4 things, Grand Overture gets damage, does not get inventory.
No inventory.
Xenophage does not get damage or inventory.
Wow, interesting. Which frame does the Grand Overture fall under between high impact, rapid, or?
It actually is a high impact.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Huh. Do we? I mean, last I've talked to a couple people, Grand Overture seems fairly good currently in PvE right now for the burst damage capabilities. Are we foreseeing any problems with giving it a? I mean, it's kind of like a minor damage buff, but with the LFRs coming down, minor.
I mean,
Grand Overture coming up.
I don't think we foresee it as being a problem. It's kind of a funky thing to use, like in terms of the gun itself and in terms of using for DPS. It's a little bit funky. Like it's not quite as straightforward as using some of the other DPS options. And even with it coming up a little bit and LFRs coming down, I think we would probably be surprised if it was like busted, broken. It might be hot, but you know, it's probably okay for an exotic heavy to be hot for a little bit.
Fair enough. By the way, I know that when we get to the mid-season balance pass talk, Drew, Cammy, and Cool Guy are going to probably have a lot to chime in with. But does anyone want to chime in now as we kind of bang out the bullet points on this season 20 Q&A list?
All good. Let the community know.
All right, let's just keep going. We'll just keep banging them out. Are Arbalist and Lorentz Driver affected by the linear fusion rifle nerf in any way?
Yes, they are. So Arbalist is getting a small overall damage nerf because it also got the kinetic damage buff, but it already had part of the kinetic damage buff. So overall, it's getting a very small damage nerf.
Got it. Okay, fair enough. Is the kinetic damage buff applying flat out to Izanagi's Burden too?
Yes. Izanagi's, Outbreak, Touch of Malice, Witherhorde, all kinetic, all getting the damage buff.
Huh.
That's going to be good.
That is very interesting. Just trying to take that all in mentally. Why have we not buffed hand cannon and pulse rifles in PvE? And by we, I mean you.
So we're actually investigating primary weapon balance in PvE. We've obviously heard a lot of the complaints that precision weapons in PvE in particular don't feel great right now and high-end content. But there are a lot of substantial changes coming in Lightfall to the sandbox, to content, to everything. So what we're kind of looking forward to doing is seeing how everything shakes out post Lightfall, and then potentially taking a holistic pass at primary weapons in PvE and trying to, if anything is underperforming, trying to bring it up so that that stuff feels a little bit better. But we didn't want to make too big of a change before Lightfall comes in and shakes everything up, because we'd end up potentially just having to redo it again once Lightfall settles.
Yeah, that's totally fair. Here's one I really want to know the answer to. Are there any changes coming to rocket launchers at all?
Nothing planned outside of Two-Tail Fox getting a catalyst, and we have a new perk for rocket launchers coming in season 21.
I'm sure you are super not allowed to speak on that, but I definitely am curious.
Other than just telling you that it will be here.
Fair enough. Do you foresee any, maybe problem isn't the right word. I think rocket launchers are really good right now. I love them for burst damage and PvE activities like dungeon, farming the big chicken boss at the end with, a good rocket launcher, demolitionist, something like that. Do we think that rockets are going to kind of really surge to the top with maybe linear fusion rifles coming down a wee bit?
I think we foresee the rockets are probably going to be strong. It would not surprise me to see them near the top.
Fair enough.
We obviously keep track of the DPS numbers that different weapons are doing.
Yeah.
But there are things that rockets can't do that other heavy weapons can. And there are places that the rockets don't excel at that other heavy weapons do. So I think we'll probably wait and see how the players decide they want to use stuff. And then if any additional changes are required, we can go from there.
That sounds good. Centered crosshair on console, ?
It's a great question.
It is on our list. We do not have an ETA for it, but it is something that is, I guess we could say, on the backlog.
Got it. Cool guy, does that drive you crazy?
It does. It's lower, right?
Yeah. It's centered on PC, right?
It is centered on PC. But any other game that you're playing, I mean, it's center of screen, right? And when I play on PC, center of screen. So it's just you could tell immediately just looking at your screen. You know what I'm saying?
Your muscle memory off a little bit, maybe.
No. It's just
It's just annoying to look at.
It's just odd. Like it's always been odd on console.
It changes the weapons view model a bit as well, or at least what you're seeing of it. Which is a little odd.
That is a little odd.
Are you, like we'll say like a two burst firing at like max rate of fire? Is that what you mean?
Like just the way the weapons, like where the weapon's positioned. When you change the crosshair from centered to like console, it changes.
Oh yeah, the whole thing moves down.
Yeah, like shifts. Yeah, it looks different. Like the view model of the weapon looks like odd. It's like more tucked, obviously because it's moving, but throws off my perception sometimes.
It's cool that it's on the backlog. I like that.
Good for the console folk.
Yeah,
what is the inventory stat? I feel like we got that question on Twitter from a lot of people who.
Yeah, so inventory is one of like the hidden stats that you can see in the API, and basically what it dictates is how much ammo you can hold in reserves. So we don't mess with this a ton, but basically if you have a low inventory stat like 0, say on a machine gun you could only hold 200 rounds in reserve, and then if you had a high inventory stat you could hold 350 or 400 rounds or something like that. Mm-hmm. So generally any perks that affect the inventory stat just increase the amount of ammo you could hold in reserve. For rocket launchers, it's a difference of 5 rockets in reserve to 7 rockets in reserve or something like that. So it's actually a super important stat for PvE. And I feel like it's sometimes overlooked because it's not readily available like in game to see how it's changing.
Sure.
But yeah, that's what it does.
Is it one of those situations where if we added that stat to the weapon page too, in addition with like AE and all that other stuff, do you think it would just be kind of like overwhelming for the new player experience maybe? Too many stats on one gun visually?
No, we've talked about it. And the problem is that the inventory stat as a number, like 0 to 100 doesn't actually tell you anything other than like it's higher or lower.
Right.
Right. It doesn't actually tell you how much you have in reserve. So it's not a super useful stat.
Got it.
And in order to actually put the number of rounds that you have, there's a complex calculation that stat goes through for every weapon type.
Sure.
And like subfamily and magazine size that dictates the final number that it gets to. So it would be extraordinarily complex to do that on just like an inventory screen.
Gotcha.
So I don't know. Like I said, it's something we have talked about, but we don't have any plans to put it on the screen.
Understandable. Let's see. Okay, we answered that question already. Any plans to adjust snipers in PvE?
So snipers are an interesting thing, right? Because they, in some cases, they're actually extraordinarily high in the damage that they deal. But they allow players to be extraordinarily safe while they're dealing the damage. So we have to be really careful how strong we make snipers in PvE. Obviously, like in D1, Icebreaker is a bad example because Icebreaker could regenerate ammo. But we all recall, player behaviors of like sitting crouched in a corner, 1,000 meters away from something and just like plinking it down. And we obviously don't want to be back in a scenario like that. Not saying we would in D2 because encounter design has changed an extraordinary amount, but we just have to be careful. So we are looking at snipers and we are hoping that we're going to find a middle ground on them where they can be sufficient damage-wise, but not so strong that it invalidates either different types of encounter designs or different weapons.
It's worth noting, I mean, the anti-flinch that they got not too long ago was a big help to them in PvE.
Yeah, it definitely made it a lot easier to hit crits with them. And obviously, like, Divinity exists as well, so...
That was the majority of questions we got from people on Twitter regarding the PvE weapon news and tweaking today. Definitely appreciate the extra insight on those. Unless anyone has any further maybe questions or thoughts for Merc regarding today's weapon news, we can move on to talking about the mid-season balance pass that dropped not too long ago for Season 19. Sounds like we can move on. Drew, do you want to take this one?
We're starting with the
anything you want under the mid-season balance pass.
Anything
I know we got
Ooh.
SMGs, we got pulse rifles, scout. You pick and choose the order you want to go.
Let's talk SMGs.
Sweet.
So, is it fair to think that the SMG changes that came out are more like they seem almost like a buff, or sometimes more of a buff than a nerf? And like. So like would 50 to 60-ish range SMGs benefit more than lose, or like more than they would lose?
So I would say that overall it was more of a buff than it was a nerf, but it's not a dramatic difference despite the numbers like kind of insinuating that. At 50 to 60 range, SMGs basically experienced no difference at all. Like that's kind of the middle of where it matches where it was before. So I think it's actually 60 is the point where like it has not changed at all. Like a 60 range SMG has the same range that it had before the balance pass. And anything below 60, the further below 60 you get, the bigger of a change it was. But the reason why we did the range change was because the amount that each individual point of range affected SMGs was way higher than any other archetype of weapons in the game. There was a huge gulf between low range SMGs and high range SMGs in terms of their performance, to the point that it was basically completely invalidating any SMGs with low range. Right.
I feel like you
what
could
we did
really
is we
feel that too in game. Like
Yeah.
it was super noticeable.
super noticeable. So what we did is we kind of just squeezed those two things together, and we weren't really concerned about bringing up the low end a ton, because no matter how much we brought, they were never going to surpass what the highest end was already capable of. It was just going to kind of squeeze those two things together. I do think that SMGs feel a little bit stronger in the current sandbox for a number of reasons, but I think the biggest one was probably the AE changes, actually.
Yeah.
Had like the biggest effect on why SMGs feel like they got buffed. It's not actually that they're more effective, it's that there's more freedom of movement when you're using them now, and they're pretty darn strong from the air, even with like completely minimal investment. So it is something that we're keeping an eye on. We obviously don't want to land back in a world where we have like a repeat of the recluse meta, right? But I don't think the increase in range to low range SMGs is really the culprit for, their potentially perceived strength.
So we're just going to sit here and not act like Teraba isn't walking around with 16 zoom, right?
And borrow
No.
time with rangefinder.
And escape velocity.
I mean, you guys
Escape
shouldn't
velocity's
keep
fun,
mentioning stuff. But no, Teraba is something that we have on our radar. We've actually got a change checked in for it already. We're playtesting it now. So I would expect at some point in the future, Teraba will be coming down a little bit. It has definitely reared its head in our metrics and also in our own gameplay experiences and our own play tests and stuff. So yeah, I would expect that at some point in time in the future, Teraba is going to be brought down a peg or two.
I've been playing a fair amount of Banner this week, and just because, Bubble Titan's really strong in Banner, like the super easy forehead loadout, I've been like just falling back on when I just get tired of tinkering around with loadouts. It's just Bubble Titan, Max Intellect, Peacekeepers, Teraba. Plug in the controller for extra fun. And it's just like,
dude, the
you just
plus 40 AE on
waste to
Peacekeepers
people. You lay
is really
waste.
good.
Yeah, it's pretty strong.
Get smoked, bro.
Yeah, there's a lot that we could say about Teraba. But just to like give slightly more context, and this actually is going to tie into something Drew's going to talk about a little bit later, I think, one of his questions. So I'll probably save most of it for there. But like, we are more lenient on perks being really, really strong when they require some sort of trigger that is generally a skilled trigger to achieve, right? Like in Teraba's case, it's usually you have to have more than one kill, right? It's either 2 kills or 1 kill and take a substantial amount of damage and then deal a little bit more damage. So like usually we are more lenient with perks being really strong if the triggers to activate those perks are pretty difficult to pull off. But even with that, Teraba is still really, really, really potent.
Potent is a good word for it, yeah.
I was gonna say, like, I feel like SMGs have been addressed or like nerfed. I mean, we talked about this change just now and gained clarity on that, but seemingly nerfed twice. But seem to have like risen up as like a pretty top meta contender, even outside of Teraba. Like Ikilos SMG is
I love that.
pretty
gun.
crazy.
Yeah,
Love
there's
it.
there's still the 100 range Shira that's put in
Mhm.
work. Sidearms are in that space now too, which is good. I like that sidearms are in that range.
Well,
So-
I just wanted to know your thoughts about that.
Well, part of it is like obviously the meta constantly shifts. The meta is fluid, right? As people discover new strategies and new effective weapons and stuff, and we introduce new weapons and new perks and new abilities to the game, like things just change natively on their own. But also, it kind of speaks to how far out of line Shiras and some of those other high range SMGs were at the beginning. Like they were fully eclipsing auto rifle range, right? And like we brought them down a substantial amount, and they were still super rangy even after that. So it kind of speaks to like there were some SMGs in the game that were really, really, really overperforming. And now they're more in line and they're kind of just like, oh, they're pretty strong meta guns, as opposed to this single weapon invalidates an entire class of another weapon. Right. So like I don't think that SMGs are in the perfect spot for them to be right now. I think they're, like you said, very strong meta contenders, especially the aggressives, just as a whole. You know, Ikilos is really good, Teraba is really good. We're going to continue to keep an eye on them, and we're going to continue to see how they play out. I don't think it's as egregious as we've seen in the past, but it's also not something where I'd be like, oh, we're never going to touch SMGs again. They're perfect. So
That's fair.
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie. I feel like I don't know if you guys play Rumble a lot. I play a lot of Rumble because I like the pace of the game, but I can tell you like the entire lobby is like Teraba, Ikilos SMG. But to your point, I want to. Do you know like? Do you have any idea of like what makes that aggressive archetype? I think there's definitely SMGs outside of that archetype that are still like good, no doubt. But it seems like Ikilos, Borrowed Time, again, Teraba, like that aggressive archetype is like super hot. Like what could be the reason for that? Or like what makes them feel so strong?
It's high
Even
body
with a
shot
lower
damage. So it's a combination of things. When we look at them, they have high body shot damage. They're moderately forgiving as far as it goes. They have a pretty fast rate of fire, so they're even more forgiving of misses comparatively. They are moderately rangy as far as it goes. A lot of them have higher than average zoom values, or can get perks that grant them higher than average zoom values. So there's a combination of things, right? They used to be encroached on from both ends. It used to be that precision SMGs outranged them by so much that it was pretty much throwing to use an aggressive, right? Because precisions were just better. Then it used to be that lightweight SMGs were also encroaching on them from the lower end of their range. We've kind of brought down lightweight SMGs a little bit, and we've brought down precision SMGs a bit. So we've widened the gap between lightweights and aggressives, and we've narrowed the gap between precisions and aggressives. And I think that combined with the other things I mentioned is really allowing aggressives to like kind of poke through into being top meta contenders as far as SMGs go. So,
and also I haven't used it yet, but you also gave the adaptive 900s a little love too.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, that was a pretty easy change to make. I mean, there was a point in time where we didn't have a lot of adaptives in the game really at all, but we started to bring them back in with the Pizza Cat and the Hero's Burden and stuff.
Pizza Cat.
Yeah, and
PCAT.
And honestly, like the point of adaptives is that they're supposed to be a super fast rate of fire, like more forgiving alternative to lightweight SMGs. Right. Obviously, lightweights have the lightweight intrinsic, which is really, really strong. And previously, although adaptives were more forgiving, the gap in their optimal was just like too big compared to lightweights. Like lightweights were just too strong in the right hands. And so what we're kind of trying to do is we're kind of trying to make it more of a difficult choice between those two things. I don't know 100% that we've gotten there, but we'd much rather take little pokes and move something into place than we would take a big swing. And like we're in an adaptive meta, right? Like we don't necessarily want that. So we're poking adaptives up. We've poked them up a little bit. I think they honestly feel pretty decent right now. But we were just trying to narrow the gap in terms of their optimal between them and lightweights with that change. So.
Yeah, I'm gonna like because I was looking at because I got like 4 hero burdens in a row. I was like, they just buffed those. So
have you been rolling with them?
I'll do it tonight.
You should give them a try. They're honestly not bad, and the Hero's Burden has some pretty good rolls on it.
Yep. The Trafalcan Repulsor.
I was to say, and it's void, so that ties in very nicely.
Dare we
What
talk about
sidearms?
pulse rifles, or did you want to move on to sidearms, Drew?
I feel like sidearms it's all close range stuff, right?
I think sidearms are in a pretty good spot right now.
Yeah.
Obviously, we brought back that buff that they got, just a small amount, and there's still some super, super strong sidearms available. But I feel like because SMGs are so strong right now too, like it keeps sidearms in check just a little bit. And because shotguns have also come up, it keeps sidearms in check just a little bit, right? Like sidearms are in that place where a small change on one side or the other could like collapse the edge of their engagement window, right? Which is something we obviously want to try to avoid doing, because like each archetype of weapon has an engagement window that it kind of lives in, right? And when you bleed the archetypes together too much, you can end up like collapsing a side of an engagement window. And what ends up happening, like what's happened with auto rifles before in the past, is like it invalidates a section of weapons, right? Which is something we want to try to avoid doing. So sidearms, although strong, are under heavy pressure from either end by shotguns and by SMGs, right? So
I think it's good that we have those options now, because in the past you were very locked in. Like there's the Fellwinter meta, right? You were very locked in to that space, that engagement range, and now a lot of things can breathe now and do well. So I'm enjoying it.
I think that like the balance between, let's say, the close range weapons, sidearms, SMGs versus like shotguns or close range special weapons has definitely gotten a lot better. But I feel like my follow-up question would be like, these weapons like SMGs and sidearms feel like they're covering a lot of the ranges or like engagements on a lot of the, like, I'm going to call them arena maps, like Endless Vale, Javelin, kind of Dead Cliffs ish. That's a worse example, but those type of maps like Wormhaven, etc. Like it feels like they're covering a lot of the, like the majority or like a lot of engagements on those maps. And like combined with the mobility options, etc., and like the spacing and hallways, it feels like at a lot of times, like for some mid-range weapons, I want to say like hand cannons, autos, pulses, it's a little hard to contest them almost. So I guess my question is like, how do you guys like manage that, or how do you feel about that? Like, are they in the place like that they're scaled well to the engagement sizes on those maps, or how do you guys feel about it?
I think, or we think that they are probably a little hot, but they're not eclipsing most hand cannon ranges to such a degree as to be egregious. Like hand cannons have a solid 10 meters over SMGs where they're still effective, right? And they have over almost all sidearms except for like one or two, they have almost 20 meters of effective range, right? So there's only so much we can do with just moving weapons in and out of ranges, because at a certain point in time, like players choose which engagements they want to take, or in some cases they force opponents to take engagements, right? And players are going to play a certain way. And if we continue to clamp down on SMG and sidearm ranges, it's the same thing that I talked about earlier with, you know, bringing shotguns up and collapsing one side of sidearms, right? Like we could potentially end up doing that on the top end of SMGs and sidearms. And if you collapse them too far, then they just become ineffective weapon choices. And then we end up back with, you know, fusion rifles now dominating that same space that sidearms and SMGs once kept them in check-in, right? Like I think we saw this with Forerunner, which is not a sidearm, you know, although it's called a sidearm, but like Forerunner is actually a hand cannon under the hood. But we saw it with Forerunner, where Forerunner's main competition was like sniper rifles. And we poked sniper rifles down a little bit with the flinch changes, and Forerunner just like shot right to the top, right? So we can't always just be like, oh, I think sidearms and SMGs are a little bit hot, let me poke those down a little bit, because there's always going to be something behind it that can potentially fill that engagement range. And then we end up pushing that down too. And then we end up with the opposite of power creep, which is we start power compression. And just generally as a whole, like that's not necessarily something we want to do for the game. And that's not really something that players appreciate a ton anyways. So there's like a really, really fine balance to strike between leaving stuff kind of hot, but with counters, and a cycle of nerfing every single thing that comes to the top in a given engagement range, if that makes sense.
Yep.
That's a great answer.
That's a good answer.
Yeah, I think that was
pretty good.
Pretty thorough.
Yeah. That's why they pay him the big bucks.
I wish.
Did you want to talk about the BXR, Drew?
Oh no, I was gonna say,
is it time to talk about the BXR?
I'm here for one reason. No, I'm joking. I feel like as a whole on pulses, I think pulses we're kind of like we're pretty good. But I'm curious to know like what the objective was overall with like the pulse changes, and do you feel those goals were met?
So pulses prior to these changes were pretty strong. They had high effectiveness. They were difficult to challenge in certain circumstances, and they were kind of bleeding into ranges that it didn't necessarily feel appropriate that they should be engaging from. The whole point of pulse rifles is that they are not as rangy as scout rifles, right? Like they are burst weapons. At long ranges, the burst is supposed to spread out and require more recoil control, and that's supposed to keep pulse rifles in check. Pulse rifles were a little rangier, really, than we wanted them to be, and particularly on mouse and keyboard with something like No Time to Explain, because the inherent like increased stability that mouse and keyboard gets was allowing for two burst, like well outside of what we would expect No Time to Explain should be able to two burst out, right? So I think we felt that pulse rifles were like good in their intended engagement ranges. They felt good, but they were bleeding out of their intended engagement ranges on the long side. And what that was doing is it was making it hard for players to counter potentially a stationary pulse rifle user who was really like dug in, because they just had that extra few meters on the end. That's all the time gap on that person anymore, right? If you have an extra 3 meters on the end, that may be the difference between you being able to close the gap with an SMG or a hand cannon and you not being able to close the gap when you're aggressing them. So I think that at their best, like at their intended engagement ranges, we think pulse rifles were in a pretty good spot. They feel good to use. They feel appropriately strong. But that intended engagement range was just like a little touch on the long side. So that was why we didn't hit anything like the optimal TTK or their damage. And we just took some aim assist and damage fall off the top.
I think for a lot of people, like,
I think you also asked, did we feel like it hit? It's still early, right? It's been what, like 1 full week with the balance pass out. and it's been one trials week, and it was trials on Eternity. I would say that my initial belief is that we moved it in the right direction, and they're probably pretty good. I say that because when we looked at Eternity the last time it existed compared to the numbers on Eternity this time, it was a substantial difference in terms of things like DMT and no time to explain, and just pulse rifles in general, right? Like the gap between pulse rifles and other mid-range options and other long-range options was much, much smaller than it was the last time we played Eternity. But we do have some map changes coming or map weighting changes coming in Lightfall. And as we said in the TWAB, we also changed aerial effectiveness, which is like a tacit buff to certain playstyles. It's a tacit buff to hand cannons, sidearms, SMGs. Or a buff by, a nerf by proxy to pulse rifles, basically. So between the AE changes, these actual pulse rifle nerfs we made, and then the map changes that are coming in Lightfall, I would want to see how all three of those things work together in concert before I would want to really make a firm statement of like, yeah, we think pulse rifles are in a great spot, or pulse rifles maybe need some more work.
Specifically on no time, like I feel like some folks that I've played with, or like at least play on MK, feel like the changes aren't super significant and like it's still pretty strong. Any thoughts on that?
I can't hear you. Give me 1 second.
Okay. Is my mic working?
I can hear you loud and clear, buddy.
Okay. Perfect.
All right. Say something again. Sorry, I lost your audio.
Yeah, no worries. Testing.
There.
We good?
Yeah.
Dope. For a lot of folk that like I've played with or heard from, like some of the changes to no time don't feel terribly significant. It's like still regarded as like pretty strong. Is that like, are you happy? Like, I guess it's still early where no time landed, or do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, the goal wasn't to just like absolutely destroy or obliterate these archetypes of weapons, right? Like the goal wasn't to make no time be a useless exotic gun. The goal was to bring no time more in line with other strong primary options, as opposed to just completely blanketing them, which is what it was doing before. So, a 20% increase to recoil on mouse and keyboard sounds like a lot, and it's noticeable. It requires more manual recoil control now to hit a 2-burst than it did before. So players who have that capability or have that skill should be able to counteract the change that we made. What it will do is that players who don't have that ability or don't have that, arm skill will no longer be able to effectively 2-burst at the same ranges that they were before. Basically because the bullets in the burst are just spreading out more than they would have before.
I can attest to that. It took me about a day to start hitting 2-burst frequently under pressure. Just a lot more pull down.
Feels different, yeah.
And not everyone obviously is as skilled as Cammy is, right? So some players will use
Sometimes.
no time, and some players have used no time and been like, oh, I don't like this. This doesn't feel good anymore. I'm going to swap off to something else. And so we've seen no time's usage and no time's effectiveness, and the win rates come down a little bit. I think enough to where it is now more in line for the sandbox that it lives in. But like you said, time will tell. So, but initial signs are promising, in my opinion, or in our opinion.
Nice. All right, so the heated question. BXR zoom. Why?
What the fuck, bro?
Yeah, so I preemptively went and pulled like a couple stats out of this. And I know it's different for you. I think we've had this discussion before, but like you play controller on PC. So like what you experience on PC is a slightly different meta than what the mostly controller world of consoles is, right? So BXR
I'm starting to think it's not slightly. The more I experience console and whatnot.
That have anything to do with weapons, Cammy.
What do you mean, Cammy?
Yeah. BXR was wildly out of band in terms of effectiveness over every other legendary pulse option on console, on controller. So especially at like high skill levels. And the reason being is because obviously the BXR is a super sweet gun, but it was kind of a jack of all trades thing. And it wasn't so bad on PC because on PC, No Time to Explain was a pretty consistent 2-burst for a good long period of time. On controller and on console, high impact pulses see much, much lower effectiveness because the 2-burst is much harder to hit there and much more range limited. So a lot of the pulse dominance on console comes from who can hit the fastest 3-burst that's still pretty rangy, right? For a while, that was Peace of Mind because Peace of Mind had out-of-band zoom. So Peace of Mind was hitting a super fast 3-burst at really long ranges. And Peace of Mind is still strong right now, but it's a little bit more in band. And as soon as that came down, that was like cue for BXR to spike. Because it had 20 zoom, because it was a lightweight, it still has a faster 3-burst than an aggressive. It has a faster 3-burst than a high impact, faster 3-burst than an adaptive. And it was also outranging almost all of those options too. And then in addition to outranging all of those options, it was also the best pulse rifle at close range because of the frame intrinsic that it has. So it was kind of sucking the air out of the room for other legendary pulse rifles in that sandbox, which is unfortunate. And it's a lot of words to say. Like, I know it hurts that it is no longer like zoom accurate to the original BR. But we had a couple choices, and it was, do we want to make it better? Do we want to keep the identity as like a long range, the dueling thing? Or do we want to lean into what makes it unique in the Destiny sandbox, which is its intrinsic frame perk? And so we reduced the zoom, which actually is a tacit buff to its close range performance because it widens the aim assist cone functionally and everything like that. It widens your field of view a little bit. So there's actually a little bit of a buff in close range performance, but yeah.
I was going to say, I feel like functionally it's a better weapon now, but spiritually it's not.
Trust me, there were many heated discussions when we were talking about reducing the zoom on it. And in the end, we had some other options, which would have been, like I said, messing with the intrinsic perk, which we didn't want to do because of its unique factor and how it plays, or doing something like hurting the stats specifically. And like those just kind of felt bad, even though it would have kept it aligned with the original, its inspiration. Like it kind of would have probably felt bad. So we'll see. We're always happy to potentially reevaluate things. If you think that there was, a better way it could have been brought online, I would actually love to hear what your suggestion is.
I don't know. It's just some of the confusion for me comes from, obviously, yeah, okay, I play on PC, but for me at least, and like, maybe demographics matter. I feel like I don't see a lot of like, even like really good controller players. It was like a lot of no time, but again, like maybe, differences with.
I want to add to that too. I've been playing a lot of controller this last month, and I just can't see me ever choosing an archetype that isn't aggressive. That 0.67, and even missing it, you still have a really good follow-up TTK regardless.
Yeah,
it just seems to outperform the others no matter what I do.
There's definitely a higher skill ceiling on high impacts, right? Because of the 0.67 TTK. Mm-hmm. And in a world where people hit that 0.67 like reliably and often, it doesn't make sense to choose a gun that's necessarily got like a 0.87 and operates in much the same ranges.
Like if you look at the chart, like the body shot TTKs among most of those are similar. So why wouldn't you just choose the one that has the fastest precision anyway?
Well, because there's something called accuracy adjusted TTK, right? Which isn't necessarily the body shot TTK. It's the realistic TTK.
That's where like Head Seeker comes in. Yeah.
It's the Stars and Shadow Head Seeker.
Yeah. So
which is an ag frame
optimal
too.
TTK is one thing, right? And optimal TTK is what you expect the best players in the game to hit, right? Consistently. And where that level sits, it varies depending on sandbox to sandbox, right? But you expect the best players in the game to be able to consistently hit the optimal TTKs. And then there's the body shot TTK, which is useful because it shows you like the bottom range of like, oh, we hit every shot, but we didn't hit any crits. But the actual TTK that is probably the most meaningful is like the accuracy adjusted TTK, which is the one that is the realistic option for whatever chunk of sandbox you're looking at that they're actually going to hit. Right. Gotcha. And so those things are different depending on input type and depending on whatever meta is currently going on and depending on weapon. But the accuracy adjusted TTK for Battler was highly competitive, more so than high impacts. And, the effectiveness numbers reflect that basically.
Is the data a fair look if Messenger isn't as easily obtainable, for example? Because wouldn't that skew the results to have something on par with BXR rolls?
Yeah, but no time. So like no time
out of the box, no time I think is better. Yes.
Yeah, no time fills the gap of like an easily achievable
specifically for controller players. I was thinking like a Head Seeker Messenger would absolutely outperform a BR.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
It's like, just that they don't have it, so they can't use it.
Yeah, but there's a ton of Head Seeker Stars and Shadows that are out there, right? That occupy the same slot. So it's not like it's impossible for them to get a Head Seeker high impact. And secondarily, they have no time to explain. So, you know, you would have expected, if that were the case, you would have expected no time to explain would be both more effective and more prevalent on controller at a high level, and it also wasn't. So Battler also surpassed no time to explain. Like, I was using, you know, legendary weapons because it's like kind of more of a fair comparison to go against like Peace of Mind and Disparity and Messenger and stuff. But it also surpassed no time to explain, which is just like was across the board prior to this considered the top of the line, you know, pulse rifle. So
yeah, I mean, I agree to disagree on this one. It's just, it's staggering to me. Like, if I use an adaptive SMG, I get bodied because both me and my opponent hit all the shots, and there's nothing I can do about it. It's just, I lose.
Yeah, I was going to say that I think that, like, so just to, like, I guess there's a lot of metrics that involve, you know, saying that, like, you know, it was surpassing it. But yeah, I gotta agree with the sentiment of like, isn't this weapon like given out to like everyone? Like, you do, like, you're a new light, you go do or something, or, you know, new to the game and go do a dares, and it's like, here, have a BXR-55, and like, it's pretty difficult to get a good roll on it. Like, doesn't that? So there's that aspect of it, and then the other aspect of it is like, if I guess the pain point was that it felt like a jack of all trades, but I don't know. I never saw the range as like as a big thing, I guess. I don't know. Like, I feel like this was a preemptive hit, but it just wasn't lethal. Like, I don't feel like it's that archetype is lethal. I think the DPS of it keeps it at bay at range. That's kind of how I felt about it.
Well, I mean,
which
Drew,
makes
like,
it feel a little confusing.
Like,
confusing.
I saw a ton of BXRs, man. It's almost as if, like, when Luna Not Forgotten, MK's or PC's like, dude, it's fine. It's a great gun, right? I mean, I would never really, I'm not using it, but meanwhile on console, everybody's getting mag held, right? There's a ton of BXRs on console, man. So
sure. But again, it's like, isn't the archetype, that archetype is like seemingly statistically like the worst of the pulses.
It's like when I look at 180 hand cannons, I'm never going to use that. It's just not good enough.
It had,
I mean, cannon damage separated.
Correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, it outranged Messenger, dude. It had like a 50-meter fall off too. I mean, it's a scout zoom.
Yeah, and that was the thing. Like, even if, you know, nothing else had happened to pulse rifles, like, it was still on the far end of its. It was way past the far end of pulse rifle engagement ranges, right? What it was effective at. And people could use it effectively at that distance, which is an issue in and of itself. But the thing is, zoom is so much more effective than range, like the range stat, on how guns perform at longer distances, because it also affects the aim assist cone and affects stability and everything like that. So we would have had to absolutely destroy the range stat in order to get it to like come in line while leaving the zoom where it was, which would have felt really, really bad. And just sounded horrible to be like, oh, we could have nerfed BXR zoom by 2, but instead we reduced the range by 55, right? And like, that's massive, massive overkill, and affects more than just its performance at long range, because now it also affects the hip fire performance as well and makes that a lot worse. So, you know, it may not have been the most elegant approach, but it was something that needed to happen. And, you know, it's funny how differently, especially now that we can see the numbers and we can really break everything down, or I should say that I can see the numbers because I'm inside. Like, it's really wild, like how differently the metas can shape out depending on like whether you're playing on console or PC. And it's because of the input device differences, and like they both have different strengths and weaknesses. You know, mouse and keyboard is super good at some stuff, controller super good at other stuff. And on controller, it was just a huge, huge outlier compared to everything else. And especially with everything else coming down, it was even more of an outlier. So unfortunately, you know, it's not, we can't make every single change and make every single, you know, person happy, especially the people who really, really love a weapon. But it was just something that had to be done. So maybe in the future we'll revisit it though.
Good to hear the insight. Thanks. The thing like Cam said, agree to disagree, but I appreciate all the insight. I think the last thing on that would be like, you mentioned zoom being such like an influential factor, and we talked about this a little earlier, but I feel like at least from my POV, it's like we see, you know, okay, you know, zoom is super influential. We need to take this down on the BR or BXR because of like, you know, X, Y, and Z, solid reasoning. it feels like a little odd though, continuing to see Zoom be such a like crazy prominent piece of like SMGs being where they are in the metagame, which also kind of just, I don't know what's how to explain that, but it feels like it's odd to see them both, like one is hit and the other in the state that it is. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, Zoom is a ridiculously effective stat compared to all the other stats. It's something we've talked about internally. Like maybe Zoom is doing a little bit too much, but it's hard to hit something like that because it's so systemic to the game and because it has such a direct impact on feel, right? Like people were very upset with the AE changes because it changed gun feel, right? And Zoom is another one of those things that if you start poking Zoom even a little bit can have really dramatic effects on how guns feel. Because Zoom, like I mentioned before, does a bunch of things. It does stuff to aim assist, it does stuff to range, it does stuff to stickiness, magnetism, but it also changes the recoil of the gun itself. Because if you zoomed in super far and your gun jumped physically the same distance, high zoom would be unusable, right? So what Zoom does is it also constrains recoil, which people have realized that on things like SMGs, and it was at one point in time, I was on fusion rifles as well. They've realized that like, oh wow, that's super, super effective at making this gun a lot more stable. And the reduction in field of view that I get from using higher zoom, because these guns are still low zoom anyways, it's not necessarily enough of a downside to negate it, right? So it's definitely something we've discussed internally that like, hey, maybe Zoom is doing a little bit too much, but if we were to ever start perking at it, would be very, very cautiously. Because the last thing we want to do is like change the way the guns feel in people's hands. In such a you do it every single time. You ADS almost every single gun. Like even more so than you jump in the air and shoot. Like almost every engagement you're ADSing. So that would be a really, really big thing to touch. We've done stuff individually before, like on fusion rifles, where fusion rifles have like a massively reduced zoom scaler to where zoom doesn't do as much on them. Whether or not that's actually been particularly effective, I think Zoom is still pretty strong on those. Obviously, Glacioclasm is a prime example. But
I can't remember if we've ever talked about this. And please don't think that I've thought this through at all. It's just off the tip of my tongue. Like, has there ever been an internal discussion that you could maybe speak of where it was like, what if we just gave like a flat zoom value to each different kind of like weapon type in the game or something like that? Just like all SMGs are X zoom, all pulse rifles are Y zoom. Because normally like now whenever a new weapon comes out, I'm like, oh, there's a new SMG. Almost the first thing for an SMG or a sidearm that I always look at is the zoom value. And if the number is too low, I just don't use it. Like
we're kind of moving there, aren't we? Like we've been poking and prodding zoom values across the board for like the last 3 balance updates, I think. We've been moving zooms kind of in there, like in a direction to be back towards like regressing them towards the mean, so to speak.
Sure.
I don't know that we would want to ever make like just one singular universal zoom value for every weapon type. I think having a range on longer range weapons, like maybe scout rifles, for example, maybe between 19 and 22 is probably fine. Or like, sidearms or SMGs, I don't think you'd ever want to go more than one in one direction or the other, because even just one almost invalidates other things that are below it. Like there's some stuff that you can do with rangefinder and various range values that can make a difference. But I don't know. I mean, I think it introduces some form of, I hesitate to say build crafting because it's not really build crafting, but like some form of excitement to those roles when there's the potential of something being different on one that's not on another, right? So I don't know that we would ever want to compress them all to be just one value, although that may be better for balance reasons. But something to look at.
For sure.
You mentioned zoom, like, and how influential, I guess, on these different stats, like stability and like what it does and like the feel. Doesn't like, maybe we've asked this in the past, but does it have an effect on like flinch? I know this is a little off.
I would probably have to look up what effect on flinch that zoom has.
Cool.
To be honest, I don't want to speak to something that I don't know with 100% certainty, so I'll just leave that question for another time.
Man.
Yeah,
Smart
sounds
man.
good.
Did we talk about scout rifles yet?
While we're on Zoom,
Okay.
there was a perk in Destiny 1. It appeared on a blue weapon and on an exotic. You basically crouch and you get more zoom. Are we seeing that?
don't
If we
remember
knew
that.
then,
What was
if
that?
we knew then what we knew now.
Yeah.
I own it. You also had private eye and custom optics. Like that was a mag perk that added like 0.05 zoom or something.
But I mean, it can also go the other way. Like you were talking about, just the differences, just seeing a weapon like Drang. I mean, that's the reason Drang was Drang. I mean, it got brought back in line. It's still a great sidearm. But what was that pulse rifle that had a 1.4? Cold denial. Like, so it can go the other way, and just as far as we were talking about feel,
and then the other extreme end, legal action 22.
Legal action's 22.
Yeah, legal action.
Yeah. See, those things are remnants of like a different era where we were using zoom like a lot more as a leverage tool, and like even I'm sure everyone here remembers back in vanilla D2, we had scopes that you could put on guns that would change the zoom values just dramatically. You could go +6 zoom on something with just a different scope, right? Sure. So we've moved away from that for a number of reasons, but yeah, it allows weapons to perform so far outside of their, like an auto rifle has an intended engagement range, and then you've got auto rifles that are just way beyond that, the end of it, right? Where they're competing with pulse rifles and like massively outranging hand cannons. And it's like, oh, well, that's interesting, but that just opens up a huge Pandora's box of possible problems.
And then they have firmly planted on them too, so.
Mm-hmm.
I gotta ask about I don't know what that pulse is called, the 22 zoom.
Legal action.
Legal action.
Yeah, legal action. That's a high impact with 22 zoom.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's almost overkill on it at that point. Like you really don't need 22 zoom on a high impact. Like it helps with the burst spread, right? But that is at 22 zoom, that is a pretty significant constriction in your field of view, even at high field of view. And secondarily, like that's so much overkill on the range of it that like it's just wild. It's like massively past the end, right? It's like putting 26 zoom on a scout rifle, right? Like there's no map in Destiny where you're going to find a sight line that is long enough for you to put that 26 zoom to use.
I looked it up in my dim, the blue scout with the custom optic private eye. I think it gets to like 40 or 50 zoom once they're all combined.
Yeah.
Into their future.
So you basically got a sniper rifle, right?
I mean, it did have combined arms in Destiny 1, but even then, you're just seeing like the Guardian at the molecular level. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, it's a magnifying glass, and most players it's not comfortable anymore. Like there is a sweet spot where guns start to feel too constrained or too weird, and there is a spot as well where like the zoom isn't enough and it doesn't feel great anymore. So trying to hit those sweet spots is an interesting problem. But yeah, I mean, legal action is bordering on a meme, kind of. So
what is this, a map for ants?
Yeah.
Did we talk about scout rifle stuff?
Nope.
Are we comfortable moving on from the pulse zoom talk, or is there more to be said?
I think you had to mention revision 0.
Yeah, happy with disparity and revision 0.
Ah, yes.
I used that yesterday for the first time.
Well, I didn't build disparity. Chris built disparity. So he, same way we did Exalted Truth and Rose, where it was like, I built Exalted Truth, he built Rose. And then I was like, I built Revision 0, he built disparity. So a little bit of competition going on there. I mean, I'm pretty happy with Revision 0. I know there's a lot of fear when it first dropped that it was going to be free sniper bullets for all and constant uptime on a sniper rifle. And there was also some consternation on the other side that like, oh, it doesn't feel very good. So I think now that it's actually in its final form, it's kind of stabilized a little bit, and it's not swinging so far wildly from one extreme to the other. Like this gun feels like crap. This gun's super broken, and I think it's kind of stabilized in between there. Where I think it's a strong option. I don't necessarily believe that it's super frustrating to fight against, which is good because I wanted to try to avoid that. I mean, my personal belief, like I've put 3,000 kills on mine, in Crucible this season. I think the alternate fire mode is like sufficiently challenging, but also sufficiently satisfying when you hit those shots. And also like I enjoy the you can pick different perks and you can have different catalysts. And like I have a crafted revision 0 for PvE, and I know a couple of my clanmates do as well. So I kind of think that the intended goal of like different people should be able to make this weapon differently in their own image. Like this is my rifle type thing. I think it worked out pretty nicely. So I would say overall, I'm pretty pleased with Revision 0 and how it's gone.
I do remember people acting like the sky was falling when they heard about the sniper shot. There was definitely a lot of panic. I think it's in a good spot. I see some of it, but it's definitely not like plaguing PvP the way a lot of people kind of thought it would.
Well, the best, like one of the ways we look at things is like we've talked about net fun before, right? Where how fun is something to use and how not fun is it to be killed by. And there's a balance that you have to strike between those things where something can be super negative net fun, where maybe it's not really that fun to use and it's really frustrating to get killed by, and that's like massively negative net fun.
So like Monarch.
I would say like how Lord of Wolves used to be.
Okay.
Was a better example of that. And I think Revision 0 is like positive net fun, which is pretty good, where it's not like the worst gun ever to get killed by when you do get killed by it. But using it generally, I think feels pretty good. So, I'm like I said, I'm happy with where I landed. Obviously, I'll keep an eye on it, but we did play test it a lot to make sure that the sniper bullet wasn't going to be just like totally and completely free. And we have other weapons in the sandbox that do similar things on a transitional state, right? Like we have No Time to Explain, 10 crits gives you the little soul that sits next to you. Touch of Malice, 10 crits. Symmetry, 7 crits, stuff like that, or 6 or 7 crits, depending on resilience. So we have other weapons in the sandbox that do similar things and enter a similar, much stronger mode. So we did have like a good foundation to look at and be like, okay, how much of an issue are these in the sandbox with what they do? Well, Revision 0 gives you a sniper bullet that doesn't track to you like Symmetry does, but it has functionally unlimited range and can instant kill you. So we kind of balanced it around things that already existed in the sandbox. And I think it's in a pretty good spot.
Nice.
I feel like a lot of exotic weapons use that get hits to do something activator. What are your thoughts on that? Like what are your thoughts on that?
It started with Hawkmoon, yeah?
It did start with Hawkmoon. Yeah. Hawkmoon's actually another example of something we're balancing it around with Hawkmoon. So we use that a ton because it's very easy for players to understand. Like there are some activators that Exotic use that are a little more on the complex side, and they're kind of hard for players to understand or players to grasp, and they'll pick up a gun and just like put it down, never touch it again. These like I think I've spoken about this before. We call them like mini games, right? Where it's like do something, get something else. So these mini games are super easy to understand. They're really flexible. And at a certain level, it also allows us to make weapons a little bit more powerful, depending on like how difficult the minigame is to hit. So we're okay with stuff being pretty strong if the minigame is like moderately challenging, because just the existence of that minigame keeps its strength in check. So like Hawkmoon is a really good example, where Hawkmoon can just like one-shot you if you succeed at the minigame. But the minigame itself leads players to play in such a way that they might not necessarily succeed at the minigame. So it's kind of like one of those loops. And in good players' hands, those guns can be really, really super strong. And it is always a concern that those guns will be too strong in the right player's hands. But especially like we've spoken about this before with AE recently, but we're okay with increasing the skill gap in that way right now. We don't want to just like blow it out massively, but we are okay saying, hey, here's a challenging thing. If you do this, you can be pretty strong for a bit, because we think that that's a fun gameplay mechanic to utilize. And it gives players.
Merc's audio cut out there for
cut out there a little
half
bit.
Of that sentence.
It gives players a sense of like in-game progression, if that makes sense. Yeah. So not only are you like trying to win the game or trying to get the objective, but you also have something on your gun that you're trying to do as you play the game. And for skilled players, I think a lot of skilled players find some type of joy in that, especially if they're playing like a non-competitive game, right? If they're just playing like, quick play or Iron Banner or something where like the win is, the win doesn't necessarily have to be the main objective to play. It's kind of more just playing for enjoyment. Yeah, if that makes sense.
It does.
Yeah, that was good insight. Thanks.
It's good. Let's see. How is the team feeling, or maybe how are you feeling, I would say, about the post DMT changes? Did they all kind of, specifically DMT, did that kind of land where you were hoping it would land for PvP?
I think we're pretty happy with where DMT landed. It was obviously in like an absurdly jack state on mouse and keyboard.
Yeah.
So this option was buried deep in the code. And most guns, when you are in hip fire, do not prefer headshots with aim assist, right? They prefer body shots. So DMT was built with that option disabled, or, DMT was built with that option enabled, so it preferred body shots. So it had a super wide aim assist cone, so it still felt good to use while you were hip firing it. And we flipped that switch, so now it preferred body shots, or now preferred headshots. Right. And it just like the aim assist cone was way too big. It was giving people headshots from really far away. So we were able to reduce the hip fire auto aim cone pretty substantially. We were able to reduce the precision aim cone, which I don't know if we've discussed precision aim cone on this podcast before, but functionally what it is that precision aim cone dictates whether aim assist will give you a body shot or a headshot, right? So it is a separate cone.
So there's yet another cone that we are introducing.
It's a cone within the aim assist cone.
It's like introducing a new character to the MCU right now.
Exactly.
It's a Smash character.
We're Thanos stone collecting all these cones right now, basically. But like the auto aim cone and the precision cone are usually the same size, right? Especially like when you're ADS. Usually if auto aim is going to pull your accuracy cone over, it's going to pull it, basically towards the head, and it's going to give you the headshot because it knows that you're trying to hit the head if you're shooting at a target. What the precision aim cone does is say, okay, we see that you're within the auto aim cone, so we're going to pull this shot over, but you are not close enough. You are not aimed close enough to the target to be within the precision aim cone. So we're going to give you a body shot instead. So it enables us to still utilize auto aim so that you don't miss the target entirely when you're just off of the head. But it enables us to say, okay, well, you weren't actually aiming at the target, so we're going to let auto aim give you the hit, but it's going to be a body shot instead of a headshot. Right. So that's actually what we're utilizing a lot more now in AE. Prior to this, we were heavy on the auto aim penalty itself, which a lot of people were like, oh, this feels bad because I'm pointing at a target and I feel like I should get a hit and I'm not. And so we said, okay, well, we'll walk back the auto aim penalty. So you're pointing at a target, you feel like you should get a hit, you do get a hit, but if you weren't pointed at the head, it's just going to say, okay, well, you were actually like a little bit beside their right ear. Like we're going to give you a body shot instead because you weren't actually pointed at the target until you get into the higher AE values. And then it's like, you can have all the crits.
There is no way that we're going to, I don't know how this made it onto the outline. Anything you can share about the exotic weapons that we saw in the trailer yesterday? Who put that on the outline?
I can actually talk briefly about Final Warning.
Really? Which one was Final Warning?
Final Warning was the first one. It was the Strand sidearm.
Oh, ooh, sure. Yeah, you know what? We'll take it. Tell me what you got, buddy.
Well, what do you want to know about?
I want to know what you got.
It's a Strand. It's a Strand sidearm.
It's a Strand sidearm. This is good.
Yeah,
it's good information.
I'm trying to think. What actually can I say? I know I'm allowed to talk about it, but I can't like reveal too much. Yeah. It is I took my inspiration from Tiku's Divination and Devil's Ruin.
Not Titanfall.
Tiku's Divination and Devil's Ruin.
Understandable. Got it.
Yeah.
Tiku's Divination and Devil's Ruin.
Yeah.
I think I saw in the trailer that the tracking rounds were just kind of like doing their own thing. I don't know if you could speak to
any. I'm
excited because you didn't say Lemon Arc, so we're good. I'm ready. Bring on the Strand.
Is there a secret to how I'll let you keep talking.
Its tracking is more similar to Tiku's than it is similar to Osteostriga. I know a lot of people were thinking that, and it is not kill trigger. So
it is not kill trigger.
Yeah, it is hip fire.
Oh,
Oh, I'm always excited about hipfire weapons.
That is
Same.
interesting.
Same. So
I'm gonna shut it down.
yeah. So
shut it
it's-
down.
yeah, those I think were the two biggest misconceptions that people were seeing, is that it's like, oh, the tracking is going to be like Osteostriga, and it's not like Osteostriga. And then the other one was that like, oh, it's going to be like Cryosthesia, where it's like a kill trigger and then you special reload, and it's not that either. So
Huh.
So I guess for clarity, what would you say is like, I think it's pretty obvious in gameplay, but like, what would you say is like the biggest difference between like Tiku's type of tracking and Osteostriga?
So Tiku's tracking is very fast projectiles that basically travel on a highly effective path to hit their target, right? They take an efficient route. Osteostriga's projectiles are like a little bit slower, and they're a little bit more, I guess we could call them like drunken. Like
lazy.
they wiggle a little bit more, right? As opposed to something that just like goes and then turns and goes to the target like TQ's does. So
Does that feel more lethal? Is there one that feels more lethal or not? Or reliable? I don't know what the word is I'm looking for here.
I think it feels pretty lethal and pretty reliable. It is kept in check by the fact that you have to charge the weapon for an amount of time before you can do it. Right.
Plasma
and I think
pistol?
I saw in chat, is it a rapid fire sidearm? It is one of the rapid fire sidearms.
Ooh.
Interesting.
Ding 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 ding.
A rapid fire, hip fire sidearm with unique tracking, doesn't activate on a kill.
So I'll let you guys noodle on that one for a bit.
I mean, Dreg's Promise had a little bit of light tracking back in the day.
It is different than Dreg's Promise. It is not like Dreg's Promise. Dreg's Promise is more like Osteostriga than
Got it.
Yeah.
than this is.
Fair.
Okay.
Fair.
Yeah, because that was my first reaction too. I'm like, but that's good to hear.
Drew, did you put this question in about the 25-meter heritage kills?
I did not.
Saw that on Twitter.
Got it.
Offhand
Have you seen him?
strike.
Yeah. I don't know how much I'm gonna put myself.
Am I
out there
allowed
like
to
that,
ask if that's the way it's supposed to work? The
So-
offhand strike?
So offhand strike, the way offhand strike is supposed to work is what it's doing when you're not standing in an imperfect lunafaction base, right?
Oh no, no lunafaction.
It's a
Yeah,
good answer to
so-
that question.
Yeah, those clips that are like the 25-meter heritage clip that's going around is someone standing in an imperfect lunafaction and
that's true.
getting basically double the damage fall off of what they would normally get doing any other thing, right? And we've seen clips go around like that for literally years. Like we've seen 50-meter fusion rifle kills and crazy stuff like that. It's something we're aware of. Like we've been aware of it for a while. And if it ever ends up becoming like a legitimate strategy that sees use in game and is strong, like we can move to address it pretty quickly because we already know what's causing it. But for the most part, it seems like it's highly effective in private matches on stationary targets who are sitting there waiting for you to kill them. So, like I said, if it ever does end up becoming something that like we start seeing it in trials and like it's really frustrating to play against, we can move on it pretty quickly and get it fixed.
Yeah, I mean, but you would get a kill, have to pop your rift, and then someone would have to be in the vicinity.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not saying it can't happen. I'm sure somebody could very easily go out and play trials next weekend and
get that clip.
Get a clip of themselves.
Oh, I
doing
hit it in live games.
But,
like it's very doable.
But it's more along the lines of like, is this something that's going to happen in a competitive environment playing against a good team that knows what you're trying to do? Like,
probably not.
Yeah.
Is
it going to happen repeatedly? Can it be abused? Yada yada yada.
Yeah.
Right?
And we'll keep an eye on offhand strike too. Like I built that perk explicitly for like, oh, we have not necessarily roadborne at home. Like the goal was like Battler at home.
Roadborne
right?
at home.
The 30-meter lunafaction shots, you have to be super precise. Like any micro flinch, you've already missed.
Yeah. No, it's more BXR Battler at home, right? It's just it's available on more weapons than just pulse rifles. So
I do like offhand, and I also like the shot swap perk.
You make him feel good. You're liking all the perks I built.
Dude, like it sounds kind of weird, and I know like I've actually talked to just random people about it, and all of them haven't really tried it. They've read the perk like, it's not for me, but like it's actually pretty nuts. And then it consumes a stack every time you use it. It's really good.
Yeah, it's actually super good on any weapon that you're going to be getting a kill and stowing it, and then you need to draw it back out for like one specific instance to use it, and then you put it back away again. Like it's like, dude, pretty strong on.
The incandescent glaive with that is awesome.
Yeah, I thought shot swap was a pretty neat idea, and it's obviously going to be on some more weapons here coming out in the next couple seasons. So
interesting.
I like that.
I think we got one.
Strike, though, I was wondering about offhand strike on heritage, like. Is that like I don't know? I guess I was curious on like your thoughts on like the base functionality. Like it seems pretty strong. I know you touched on that with the BR at home, but like what is it? Is it 14 meters? Am I remembering?
Yeah, it's 14, exactly 14.
Yeah. Like that's still like pretty crazy. Like
and that's the kill activator.
Pretty, yeah, like pretty
so
strong.
So it gets your 10 or 11, then it pumps it to 14 from the hip.
Mm-hmm.
That's how it's supposed to work, just to be clear.
Yeah.
Or like any general thoughts or insight, I guess.
Mostly from the POV of like, I don't want to be using a bugged weapon, knowing it's going to get changed harshly.
No, I mean, it is working as intended. It's strong. Like,
oh hell yeah, okay.
It's super strong. I mean, there's a lot of steep competition for perks on shotguns, especially right now with handling and range and everything else that they do. Like it's super strong, and this one's a kill trigger. We talked about it earlier in the episode. We're like, we are more okay with stuff being strong if it comes after a kill trigger, because that instantly greatly reduces the effectiveness of like who can use the perk, right? So we're going to keep an eye on it. Again, it's not a surprise to us. If it ends up being something that's like, man, this is awful to play against in comp. Like I hate this. This is really super unfun, right? Again, if the net fun swings negative, then it's something that we can address very quickly, the same way we would Lunafaction.
I think it'll turn into a chaperone situation where if you see it in the feed, you just tell your team, shap perk, shap perk, shap perk.
Yeah.
If you think you're dumb.
Yeah, like there are ways to play against it, and it might suck to be like absolutely mapped with someone using a heritage from the hip. But at the same time, you give the person credit. They got a kill first, and then they were able to hip you.
They ran you down.
Yeah. So
on the topic of hipfire, I wanted to clarify. So on the crosshairs of a slug shotgun, the inner one is the accuracy cone, right? And the outer one is the aim assist cone? I don't know if you can recall this
on what,
but like
on
slug shot.
I'm trying to think. I don't want to speak on that because Chris has been the one who's done a lot of the reticle work.
Fantastic job.
Can't
by
you
the
tell
way.
by just kind of jumping in the air when one of them kind of balloons out?
I don't think they are tied to I don't think they're directly tied to accuracy and aim assist, like specifically, right?
Okay.
We are planning to do more reticle work in the future to make things more accurate. And I think even in 700, we talked about like spread shotguns, like pellet shotguns. The accuracy or the reticle is going to scale when you like do anything that blows out the accuracy cone, like put on a smooth bore or something. Like the accuracy, the reticle is actually going to move right with it, so you can see it. I don't know what is 1-to-1 on the slug shotgun right now, and I don't want to speak to it because I don't want to give you guys bad information.
Yeah, of course.
That's fair, totally.
Yeah, I think if I can recall, the slug shotguns, like the inner circle expands when you jump. So I'm like led to believe it's accuracy cone. You don't have to comment on that. But when me and Cam noticed the other day, actually, is the outer circle is like, what was it on M&K, like way bigger than
like double the size of the controller circle.
So that's why we were at, like, I was wondering, because I think that would affect hipfire performance and like, utilizing or the difficulty in utilizing the offhand strike perk.
Yeah, I think next time Chris is on one of these, you should definitely talk to him about his work with reticles and like what they signify and stuff, because he would definitely be able to give you like more information on how those work on the different weapons and different input devices and stuff. So
okay, cool perk talk. Shot swap, is it a scaler or just handling off the top of your head?
It's a scaler.
Yeah, it's fast, dude.
Oh hell yeah, I need to go use that then.
It's fast.
It's good to know. I think we have time for like one more good question. I'll just go to the bottom one here. What are some examples of weapons that you think are in a good place, or ones that you think might need to be looked at for PvP?
Yeah. Actually, it would probably be good if we went with the above question first, because I actually tied these two together in my answers when I read them. So the above question was like, how do you choose what to nerf for a balance pass?
Oh, I see. I figured that would be too much of a softball for how much time we had. But yeah. Knock it out, baby. Knock it out.
I don't know. I'm here, right? I'm already here. I might as well talk about it. So.
Trying to respect your time, my man.
No. So when we're looking at stuff to nerf for a balance pass, like there's a whole host of things that we use. And like people meme on us for like, oh, they only balance based off usage, right? But like we have weapon effectiveness, win rates, community sentiment, playtest feedback, obviously net fun, which we've talked about, our own in-game experience, right? We have discussions amongst the sandbox team constantly where we're batting ideas around. Someone's like, hey, I ran up against this and trials the other night, and like it seemed really ridiculous. And then we go pull a bunch of statistics on it, and like we look at the stats, and we look at all this stuff. There's a ton of things that we look at before we decide to nerf something or before we decide to buff something, right? A lot of the time what we do is we kind of have reference points or like benchmarks that exist in the sandbox of stuff that we think is in a good place in terms of strength. And if something moves past it or starts like encroaching on it, then we're like, ooh, like we might need to keep an eye on this, right? So now I can say, what are some examples of weapons you think are in a good place? Following up on that.
Fair enough.
Right.
Okay.
So I tied these things in. Generally, we think Ace of Spades in its current iteration is like very strong, but not in an unhealthy way. And the same thing with like Rose. Right. So we think those are examples of like really good, strong primary weapons that in the current sandbox and in the current iteration are pretty healthy. And so if something starts to overtake those, that's when it like the Eye of Sauron like focuses down on it. Right. Okay. So Cool Guy mentioned Teraba earlier. Teraba is one of those ones that like for a while it kind of labored in the obscurity of like really good players were really effective with it, but it wasn't, it wasn't seeing a ton of use. It wasn't showing up a bunch in trials and survival games. And then it started to get more and more and more and more people were able to acquire it. More people saw YouTube videos on it. More people saw streamers using it. Peacekeepers, AE, all the stuff.
What's the Peacekeeper to Teraball ratio?
And so it has now crept up and up and up and up and up. And it's now what we refer to as like in the danger zone, where it's like surpassed Ace of Spades. And so we're like, all right, like it's time. Like Teraba's time has come. So
good call.
I won't tell you too many others that we're keeping an eye on. But Vex Mythoclass is one which we do not have any plans to do anything to it.
Did you say Vex Mythoclass?
Mm-hmm. But Vex Mythoclass is one of the ones
with
that
Rain
is
of
like,
Fire, it shreds.
It's very good with Rain of Fire.
Very effective.
Very good with Rain of Fire.
Very effective. So yeah. And as far as stuff on the other end, like we also have like a lower tier of that where like this is something that maybe a decent amount of people use it, but it's not super good, but like it's kind of okay and it's kind of healthy, right? Because like if a bunch of people use something but it's not very strong, like it's not really super frustrating to play against. It probably just like feels good or something like that. So we've got weapons on that end too. And there's stuff below that we're looking at bringing up. So Graviton Lance is one of those things. Salvation's Grip as a heavy weapon is one of those things. Rapid fire fusions. We're trying to find a way to bring trace rifles up that doesn't result in us going back to laser tag weekend, which is, we talked about it the last time we buffed trace rifles, right? But like even the tiniest little bit of damage can just make them like absolutely melt.
It's like a House of Cards type situation there. Yeah. That's very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Oh man.
Out of curiosity,
go
you
ahead,
made the example of like Ace and Rose with like things like Exiled Truth. That's the name of the hand cannon, right?
Exalted Truth.
Exalted, that's it. Exalted Truth and even Igneous Hammer. But those fit into that like similar category?
They would fit into the category of like they're weapons that are fine in the sandbox. They're not necessarily something we use as benchmarks, right? Because Exalted Truth, I think I've talked about ease of use on the podcast before, but when we look at ease of use, like acquisition is also a part of ease of use. Right. And one of the reasons why Teraba had low ease of use, besides the perk requiring multiple kills, was that the acquisition was relatively costly and expensive. And so you just physically don't see a lot of it. right? And Exalted Truth is one of those things where like we had the weekend where everybody could grind out, Flawless and then get as many of them as they want, liquidated a bunch of people's reserves and stuff. But like Rose's acquisition path has been much easier. So we see a substantially higher effectiveness out of Rose. More people are likely to have great rolls on it. Dedicated players are more likely to have like their Rose that they want. And so they're more likely to use it effectively in PvP. So Exalted Truth could be there because I think its strength is comparable to Rose, but we're not currently using it as a benchmark just because at this moment, only a very small number of players have what I think they would like to use as like their preferred role in Exalted Truth. So compared to a much larger number of Rose players.
Bro, I spent close to like 15K shards that weekend.
Oh, so you're one of those.
Yeah. Yeah. I spent a lot of in-game shards and glimmer and whatnot farming out that damn hand cannon.
But what did it cost you?
My sanity, because
Everything.
I tried to get that roll, that frenzy perfect float roll, because I know that they interacted uniquely together, and I wanted to make a video on that unique interaction.
They did, didn't they?
And then I did.
Perfect frenzy.
And then
Perfect
2 hours after I put that video out, it was the first ever new TWAB this Wednesday at Bungie, so it totally buried my video underneath the prison. And then like 1 day later, it's like, oh yeah, by the way, those perks are nerfed. We're killing that interaction.
Like, nah,
like,
son,
awesome.
good try. Good try.
Not bad.
So it doesn't do that
these
anymore,
things
right?
happen,
Just for
bro.
clarity.
No,
Sometimes
doesn't
that's
do
the
that
way
anymore.
the cookie crumbles, you know?
Cool.
Yeah. Those were really good answers. I appreciate that, buddy.
Yeah.
One more very quick question. How does it feel to be a bad person, knowing that the Lightfall weapons are just reskinned moon weapons? And why are you just a bad person, dude? Why just?
I mean, I think the
do your
Lightfall
job.
weapons look super sick. So I'm pretty stoked about them.
Obviously fucking around. The weapons look super dope. I loved that trailer. Yeah, same model, but like to me, I don't know if I'm kind of alone in this. To me, it's like if the weapons feel good and they perform good, fucking whatever, dude. And like,
Hey, dude, and the audio team knocks all the model apart too, dude. Like,
it's
the moon
really
weapons are arguably
looking
the
good.
coolest weapons in Destiny 2. Like, really, when you think about it, like the Lullaby's little feather and its sound.
We have
So.
incredible like art and sound. Like all the teams that we have that work alongside of the weapons team are just absolutely incredible at their jobs. Like
so cool.
it consistently blows me away when I see the concepts for some of the stuff we're working on, or we get the first audio passes back on the guns, and like how much it changes the feel of the weapons when it is like, yeah, like the Revision 0 stuff, like the heavy round when you switch to the alternate fire mode, it was like, man, we got that back. Yeah. And it was like, oh my God, like this is sweet. So yeah,
Like
they make everything we do better.
Collective obligation sound, like when you go into that second fire mode.
Mm-hmm. It's pretty impressive. Like what we do is we do balance and we do stats and we do perks and we pick archetypes and subfamilies and stuff. But you get the gray block models in and stuff and playtest and you're playing with it and you're like, yeah, it feels all right. Like it is what it is. And then like the audio pass comes through, or like the first hard surface pass comes through, and you're just like, ooh, now we're cooking. All right.
Brings it to life, huh?
Yeah.
I was gonna ask, like, when's the moment, or is that the moment where something really feels like it's come to life?
I mean,
It's done.
it depends, right? Like it depends. Like Revision 0, I felt like Revision 0 was pretty golden, like super, super early in development. Like I was using playtest and I was like, man, this thing's pretty sweet. Like I'm having a lot of fun using this. And other people, it's always fun when you're in a playtest, like other people are voluntarily picking to use your gun without necessarily being told to.
That is very
like when
cool,
we're
I
having
would
our
imagine.
competitive PvP playtest or something like that, and like super sweaty players who are really good are like throwing on your gun to
like,
run
yay.
some mock comp matches or something like that, and you're like, damn, all right. And then sometimes it's like, final warning, legitimately it wasn't until I checked in the very last change I made to it that like I used it the next day and I was like, ooh, all right, cool. Like now this thing's feeling like, there we go. Yeah. And we finish our work and then the rest of the stuff like comes onto it later. And then we got, the final VFX passes on it. We got the final audio on it and everything like that. And then it came together super, super nice. But yeah, it just depends what point in development. Like you kind of hit it, you kind of figure out what the fantasy of the gun is supposed to be and what the feel of the gun is supposed to be. And sometimes it's super fast and sometimes it like comes down to the wire. But I feel like the rest of the team is so strong that it's always going to get there, because like they could just make it sound so incredibly cool that you'll use it just because it sounds super sweet. Or like you'll use it just because it's like, oh, this thing looks so clean. Like I just want this on my character when I'm walking around, right? So
That's cool.
I feel like it's definitely a rising tide type situation.
Oh,
Shout out to Macabre.
did you touch
mech one?
Did you touch Nameless Midnight at all? Does that have your fingerprints on it?
No, so I make
Confirm nor deny.
So I make event weapons, Iron Banner, Trials, and like the Crucible like random drop are what I do. And then if I have an exotic on the season, then I'll do one of the exotics too. So we usually divide the work up pretty evenly amongst the weapon design team.
Nice. Just figured I'd float that one out there. I saw that in the trailer. It was that like Leo meme when he's like sitting on the couch in front of his like, that's the Nameless Midnight. Dude, really good stuff. Anything else you wanted to maybe put out there into the world that we didn't get to a chance to cover tonight?
No, I think we covered a lot of stuff. I'm glad I had a chance to come on here and talk with you guys, and I hope that in the future, maybe post Lightfall or something, I'll get a chance to come on and talk with y'all again. And I hope that other people from Bungie have this opportunity as well, because it's always super, super fun experience getting to chat with y'all, and feels good to be back. Feels like I never left, right? Except for I have a little bit more to share this time than I do on like a normal firing range.
A little bit more.
Yeah, on the thumbnail, it's just gonna be like a silhouette of a tank top. It's gonna say the return.
Yeah, everybody was making fun of me for not wearing a tank top last time. I was like, it's cold down here, right? Now it's back up to being 80 degrees in my office. So I'm wearing the tank top again.
Now he's back in his true form. Well, as always, it's super good to talk to you. Very proud of the work that you're doing. Really excited for Lightfall. Really appreciate all of your insights and any information that you were able to share tonight, which is super appreciative, especially that you hopped on the show kind of last minute. That just kind of happened together real quick. So big thank you to Mercules and all the powers at Bungie that I'm sure you had to get multiple approvals from to probably be here tonight. So big thanks, buddy. Big thanks.
Absolutely. I'm sure some of them are listening in and watching, and they'll hear it, but I'll pass along the thanks as well. I'm super appreciative because I really didn't think it was going to happen when it was this last minute, but I'm glad we were able to make it work.
Goddamn. Very quickly, we'll go around the table, tell people where we can be found when we're not here on the show. Cammy, where can the people find you?
Twitch.tv/CammyCakes. Thank you.
Cool Guy, what about you?
Cool Guy Games on YouTube and Twitter.
Drew? Here, perfect. I'm Fallout. You can find me youtube.com/FalloutPlays, twitch.tv/FalloutPlays. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'm not sure what our schedule is between now and Lightfall, or after for that matter, but we'll be sure to keep you posted on Twitter. So thank you very much for joining us. Take care of each other, and we'll see you next time.